President Trump wrapping up a trip to Scotland, playing some golf this morning, and then heading back to Washington, D.C. Jonathan Savage, Fox News Radio, is here to talk about the trip, put a bow on it on KCMO in Kansas City. Jonathan, good morning. Great to have you here on KCMO. The biggest win for the president on this overseas trip was what?
I think the biggest win would be striking a trade deal with the European Union. It came as a bit of a surprise the day before. They said it was 50-50. They were going to get a trade deal done. And in fact, this whole weekend was meant to be a private visit or a working vacation. But he did manage to get what he called the biggest trade deal in history done between the United States and one of its biggest trading partners. It means that almost all European goods entering the U.S. will be subject to a 15% baseline tariff. And the European Union has pledged to make $750 billion of strategic purchases, particularly of energy, during President Trump's term, and European companies are to invest $600 billion in the U.S. over the same period.
What about the, not a big loss, but that thing that is still lingering out there that's remaining a thorn in the president's side overseas? What is that issue and that thing that was evident after the last few days?
I think there's possibly two. Perhaps at the moment Gaza is the bigger one, but I think European leaders who are not satisfied with the trade deal might be satisfied to see President Trump perhaps changing his view on the situation in Gaza. Here's the key example. On Sunday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said there is no starvation in Gaza, despite pressure from not just governments but non-governmental organizations to allow more aid in. Yesterday, President Trump said, yes, many people are starving in Gaza and Israel could do more on humanitarian access. And President Trump talked about the images he'd seen of starving children in the territory. And I think that's something that European leaders, such as the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who met him yesterday, had been hoping President Trump would say.
Now, with that trade deal, Jonathan Savage, with the EU, what did that deal come down to, or who did it come down to, considering, like you said, it was 50-50 and then we get a deal a day later? Was there something that, or someone that helped get that deal across the finish line?
I think the pressure of time focused the mind, because 30% was the threatened tariff that the US was going to put on EU goods, and the European Union managed to get that down to half of that rate. The leading figure for the EU on this was the European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, but at the same time, European leaders not particularly happy. The Prime Minister of Hungary, Viktor Orban, said that President Trump ate von der Leyen for breakfast.
Is that right? Wow. What's your perception on the leaders in Europe? We know that Trump's never been a very popular figure amongst many of these leaders, but at least over here I sense a bit of a about face in terms of how they're dealing with him, how they're handling him, maybe a little more respect from some of these leaders. What's your read reporting from overseas on how that relationship has developed between Donald Trump and many of the European leaders?
Certainly more congenial, certainly more flattering from a lot of European leaders. I mean, one of the big examples, the British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, when he went to Washington earlier this year, he handed over a letter from King Charles inviting President Trump to the United Kingdom for an unprecedented second state visit. That kind of gesture is the sort of thing that President Trump appreciates, especially because he's such a big fan of the British royal family. And perhaps the UK government would look at this and say it kind of paid off, because the trade deal the UK struck with the United States is better than the European deal.
So you're telling me, and we've gotten that sense, but you're there in London, for people who don't know, the president is a fan of the royal family just from a historical perspective, a respect perspective. Is that the viewpoint and the word overseas in terms of how that relationship currently stands? And he's always been that? He's just been looking for that respect on the other end as well?
Yeah, I mean, he loves the pomp and the pageantry of the British royal family. He also has another strong connection with the United Kingdom in that his mother was from Scotland, and he feels a connection to Scotland. So that's something that sort of works in the British favour as well when it comes to having a good transatlantic relationship. So all that sort of coming together at the moment with the trade negotiations, with President Trump's new golf course, with the state visit. It's been quite a whirlwind few months with an awful lot of diplomacy going back and forward across the Atlantic.
So in the last minute, Jonathan Savage, what's that big thing that's still out there when it comes to this relationship between the United States and, let's say, the EU in general, that you think still needs to be figured out in the weeks and months ahead?
Well, I think they're happy with the predictability, at least, of this trade deal. Attention might turn to the war in Ukraine and getting that sorted in a manner that pleases European leaders, because they're concerned that Ukraine should get a just and lasting peace deal. They have seen President Trump's view on this war change in recent months. He's become far more critical of Vladimir Putin, far more defensive and respectful of the Ukrainian position and the Ukrainian people. And I think they'll be hoping that their continued efforts in that regard will bear fruit in the next coming months.
Well done. Jonathan Savage, Fox News Radio in London. Thank you, Jonathan. Appreciate the time on KCMO.
Thank you.